following a previous video I made on review bombing, my video was subsequently review bombed, giving me my lowest like to dislike ratio of any video I've ever made. I hadn't seen that many thumbs down since Amy Schumer decided she wanted to act, but they claimed I never gave their points a fair hearing. So here are 13 reasons players review bombed DayZ's latest DLC. If you liked the video, please leave a like or a subscribe, it really helps the channel. But without further ado, let's get into the video. Shit. I think I just took off an eyebrow. Look, these are just my opinions, but feel free to jump in at any time and tell me why I'm wrong. You can use the comment section, I do genuinely read every comment I get. So let's just jump in. So their first claim is that DayZ's DLC is bare bones and unfinished. It says Frostline feels underdeveloped and rushed with minimal resources invested compared to its price. Survival progression is disappointingly shallow. Now on the surface, that sounds pretty damning, but when you actually break down exactly what it's saying and exactly what DayZ's DLC offers, you start to see a bit of a conflict. The DLC has so much. It brings a huge snowy map with tough new survival mechanics like managing extreme cold, finding natural shelters like caves, and even using boats to explore frozen rivers and coastlines and so much more, because regardless of what you think about boats, they were literally added to support the DLC, as was all the cold and temperature revamps. There's incredible environmental storytelling, there's brand new particle systems, new features, new mechanics, new weather systems, new altitude systems, there's brand new items to find, there's brand new animals coupled with their own individual AI revamps. There's just so much here. The only way to use or utilize these things to their full potential is to pair them with the DLC. But to say that this is bare bones is just completely untrue. We have thousands of hours of content to prove otherwise, plus a full dev blog that breaks down almost every change. Does that mean it's perfect? No, there are some things that I think could be improved, one of which I mentioned in my review, which was specifically the islands. I just felt that there was no need to be there. But personally, I don't consider this to be unfinished, it's just an area I would like further development on, and they've said that they are actually going to add more things based on player feedback. In fact, a month after release, they released an entire update adding way more things already, including adding brand new areas and a complete rework to looting, so saying it's bare bones is just wrong, because there's so much meat on this bone I would almost go as far as saying it's strong and brave. Their next point was deliberate content cuts. Features withheld to artificially extend the game support timelines. That would be terrible for business, and I'm pretty sure it would hurt their bottom line, and I don't know about you, but companies don't like to hurt their bottom line. This, in my opinion, just comes from a complete lack of understanding of Bohemia Interactive themselves. You have to remember they're not a AAA company, but they are sure as hell competing with AAA companies, so that's why some things may take longer than other places. They don't just have 45 companies scattered around the world where they can shift workload. So that claim is completely unfounded, and with regards to the deliberate content cuts, DayZ introduced a brand new engine. Some things didn't work, and a lot of players got annoyed at this, but then if you see the old engine and compare it to the new one, you'll sort of see why that decision was made, and since they did that, DayZ has increased its numbers every year consistently, so it was definitely a good move on their part. So here I genuinely do sympathize. I understand why a lot of people will be annoyed at this. I get it, it's just part of game development. If they didn't make the changes, people would still be complaining that the engine was so old and so outdated that Jake Paul wanted to fight it. Next, and actually I've seen this argument a lot, it's recycled assets. The Tanoa map from Arma 3 repurposed and marketed as new and unique. Its price exceeds the original Arma 3 Apex expansion despite being far less innovative. Okay, so a few things here. Firstly, it was never marketed as brand new and unique. I don't know where that's come from. That is a straight up lie. They maybe said it was new to DayZ, which it is. In fact, the very first teaser they ever shown specifically showed a map that we were supposed to draw connections to. Remember the big 35? Yeah, literally every content creator I can think of covered it. And then they invited a bunch of content creators where they did this big reveal, and then they told the content creators exactly what was going to happen, and they allowed them to even announce it on their channel. They showed them a big video that we now have access to. to. Then further down the line, they kept going on, it was Tanoa but changed, and then they have the dev blog, which again you can see they constantly show the before and afters and showing the differences. They did a whole thing on it, like at no point did they say that it was new. This is just wrong. Oh, and this video I'm showing here is from Sumrak's channel. I'm just going to show a little bit of it, but the video is incredible. You should absolutely give it a watch. I will put the link in the comments. And again, you just have to read the dev blogs to realize that it's not far less innovative at all. But you know, if you like the Apex expansion, great, go play it. It was good. I have it. Next is reuse of existing assets, borrowed content from other Bohemia games, examples Vigor, Arma 2, Arma 3 with little original work. Yeah, other than the 400 unique new assets, as well as all the brand new sounds, as well as all the new animals and new things you can find, the new insides, the new designs. Other than all that, yeah, it's not original. Also, I would argue that all that work was original anyway. Let's say they took every single thing from Bohemia's Vigor game. They made the assets, they own the game. It's original work. You can't say it's very little original work, because who did it originate from? Also, literally every single game company I know does this exact thing. Have you ever played COD? Have you ever played Assassin's Creed? Have you ever played a FIFA game? Look, maybe I'm just tired, or maybe it was all that prenatal alcohol my mother consumed, but I just don't think it's fair to blame DayZ for an industry standard, especially when they're using content that's their content. Assuming that's even true, I haven't actually seen any proof of it. Next is exploitation of modders. Instead of hiring skilled developers, Bohemia relies on modders as cheap labor. Okay, so let's discuss why Bohemia hires modders. There's a few reasons, but let's focus on the main one. DayZ has its own engine, and just because you can use one engine in game development doesn't mean you're trained to fully utilize another. So yeah, you can pick it up eventually, but that takes time, training, and a whole bunch of other stuff. When you hire modders from the community, you're hiring people who are already familiar with your engine. People who are not just skilled in its use, but who have a portfolio of great work you can use to judge their ability from, specifically from your engine. They're not cheap labor, that is just how many companies operate. And additionally, Bohemia, as far as I know, also works with modders and not just employed modders, who are now technically full developers. But I have no idea what deals they've struck with them, and neither does anyone else, so none of us can really comment on something we have no idea about. That is called being dishonest. Next point, creative stagnation. Borrowed mechanics from the Mausk, lacking the bold risks seen in earlier updates like 1.14 Infected Zones. So the Mausk was created by Sumrak, who is a DayZ dev, who also helped create Sakal, so yes, there probably will be some crossover. That's not creative stagnation, that's called listening to the community, the same community, especially on console, who have been calling for these exact things. However, I would like to add a few things to this. The difference between the mods we experienced and saw on the Mausk and the quality of the changes that are now in DayZ Vanilla are vast. You cannot possibly compare the quality of a mod to the quality of a full development team. I don't really have much more to say on this. As for the creative stagnation, I completely disagree with it. As for the lacking the bold risks seen in earlier updates like 1.14, other than 1.14, what bold risk was taken? Oh, you mean like in patch 1.26 where they added a whole new map and completely changed and reworked core mechanics? You see why this point doesn't work? This point just kind of sounds like you like 1.14 as an update, which is fair enough, it was good, but you know, I think everything else is really a matter of opinion, so I'm not going to disagree with it, I'm not going to agree with it, it's down to the individual. The next point is overpriced for the quality. Poor balance, incomplete progression, no dynamic events, limited weapons and vehicle variety, and a lack of infected zones or meaningful points of interest. Okay, so let's address them one by one. Poor balance, yeah, no, I think that's probably a fair point. I can see the map being a little bit poorly balanced at the moment, but it is fairly new. However, the update they put out a month after release kind of addressed a lot of these balancing issues for me. Maybe other people feel differently. Incomplete progression, I don't really feel that way, especially with how the map is designed. No dynamic events. There are dynamic events, one of which is the containers which wash up on shore, limited weapons and vehicle variety. This wasn't that kind of update, so I don't think it applies. Any variety issues that have applied to Sakal have also applied to the other maps because they've rebalanced everything, so it could be balanced a little better, but that will come with time. Again, almost every single game I've ever played has a patch a few days or weeks later that usually changes and rebalances things, because until you've got the map or the game out in the world, you can't really balance it appropriately. So I've got to say it again, I think a lot of these points kind of come down to a lack of understanding with regards to game development in general, and that's not meant as a shot. Not everybody knows everything except my ex, who thought she did. Yeah, we should give her a call. And then the last one was the lack of infected zones or meaningful points of interest. Again, I don't completely disagree with this point. I think it would have been nice if we could have went into places like the Radome, for example. So I do agree there are certain things with regards to points of interest that could be improved. Right now, there are some of them which feel a little bit underwhelming, but keep in mind they have released the updates a month later which addressed some of these issues, specifically with the eco plant, which they've now reworked quite a lot of, and it looks really good. So yeah, I don't completely disagree with every point made here, but I do think these things will come with time. The overpriced for the quality comment I think is personally ridiculous. I've said this before, I will never judge anybody for saying that they feel as though it's overpriced, because value is personal. It's personal to everybody, to their feelings, to their personal circumstances, financially, and I don't want to sit here and try to belittle somebody for it. If they think it's overpriced, maybe it is to them, and that's absolutely fair enough, but to me, I've put like 900 hours maybe across all platforms into the recent DLC, and I'm still going, and this wasn't for content, this was just me playing with friends. So I just think anything that can do that is absolutely worth the money. Just a quick heads up, you've made it this far into the video, which means you might actually enjoy the content, and if you do, maybe consider subscribing and liking for more content. Next point is manipulative marketing. Introducing Cool Edition along Frostline to appear as a deal but offering no real value. Items like soundtracks and wallpapers are freely available elsewhere. So this is broken down into two parts. One is manipulative marketing claim and the other is the Cool Edition isn't worth it. As I've just said, worth is personal opinion. It's entirely up to you if you think it is or isn't. As for the manipulative marketing, DayZ have been completely honest since day one. They've shared behind the scenes stuff leading up to it. They gave everybody literally thousands of hours worth of content by releasing it to streamers 2 weeks early. 90% of it was live streamed, by the way, so there was no editing or no clever manipulation or anything. The majority of people who played the game played it live. There is no way you could have walked into this DLC and not been given enough opportunity to understand exactly what you were getting. In fact, that has been one of the things that I've praised DayZ for recently the most, is the fact that they were so transparent with everything. So quite honestly, I'm not even sure where this point came from. Next point is a price gouging. Not entirely sure what this or the next few have to do with DayZ Sakal, but they're on the list, so I'll go through it. Patch 125 increased the game's price when Livonia became a default inclusion, yet Livonia is marketed as a gift in deluxe editions. I did look into this and I couldn't find exactly what they were talking about. There's no gift Livonia that I can find in the deluxe edition. If you buy the normal edition of DayZ, it just says DayZ base game and Livonia, and if you buy the deluxe edition, it says DayZ base game and Livonia, so both of them say the same thing. Like, I'm literally looking at the standard version of DayZ's Steam page right this second. It says DayZ is a hardcore survival game, it talks about DayZ, and it says DayZ includes the original Chernarus terrain and the Livonia terrain. So again, I have no idea. Console is pretty much the same. I've just checked before. I think this is a bit of a twist or a misunderstanding. But obviously adding a paid DLC to the main game will make the main game go up in price. Next point is a neglect of legacy maps. Okay, so this point has got so little to do with Sakal, it's actually focusing on other maps. Anyway, a neglect of legacy maps. Core maps have seen little attention or updates. I mean, apart from all the attention and updates they got. So let's ignore all the loot changes, all the balancing changes, all the mechanical changes, and all the things like the skybox, for example. If we throw all that to the side and let's just focus on the maps themselves, specifically points of interest and the actual landscape. Livonia had a huge rework, so I'm not sure where this comes from. They've added a bunker, they've added new flats, they've added new points of interest, they've completely expanded areas, they've made places more balanced, just much better, it flows better, it's a much better map than it was before the update. The changes on Livonia were pretty huge. As for Chernarus, it did receive an update, and obviously they completely reworked Northwest Airfield and they added some new places, which was quite cool. Not to the level of Livonia, but then Chernarus is arguably the most balanced map that's ever existed in DayZ history. So what is it exactly you want them to change? That is a genuine question. For me personally, I would like to see more environmental storytelling on Chernarus. I think because that kind of came directly from the mod, we did miss out on a lot of that, whereas we didn't with Livonia, and we certainly haven't with Sakal. So I would personally like to see more of that, but other than that, I don't really know what they would change. So let me know your thoughts on that. Next point, technical issues persist. The game has never reached a true release state. Again, this is something I don't agree with, but I also kind of agree with. Like, yes, there are technical issues I would like to be solved, but it is a stable game. I don't think there's anything game breaking, and if you compare the game now to how it was in 2019, it is night and day. They've done so many fixes and repairs and patches. If you don't believe me, just go on check the history of patch notes. You'll see thousands of them. So although there are technical issues in DayZ, and I'd never say it was a bug-free, completely smooth experience, I wouldn't go anywhere near saying it never reached a true release state. I think that's a complete false statement. I think personally, a lot of issues I experience are down to desync, which is more down to the server providers than DayZ themselves. And I'm sure there's always going to be somebody to disagree with this, and that's absolutely fine, but for me, I'd say DayZ was a pretty stable game. It wasn't. Like, one of my first big videos was me ranting about how unstable the game was, but that was back in like 2020, and again, the game has just completely changed since then, so I don't agree with this point. I feel as though it's a bit of an exaggeration, and the game has had more patches than whoever Chris Brown is knocking around these days. Next point, misleading patch notes. Updates frequently fail to deliver promised fixes or features. So with regards to this point, I did some digging and I couldn't really find out what they were specifically referencing. I think its use of the word frequently is also incorrect. Patch notes aren't a list of changes they expect to make, they are an ongoing progress report of changes made. And patch notes, as experimental goes on, do frequently change and have amendments made to them, but there may have been times they've thought they've fixed a bug only for it to have manifested in a different form when it's released to experimental or even to stable. This is why experimental exists, to try and limit that as much as possible. And despite going back to 2021, I couldn't specifically find any example of them lying. As for promised features, this is a weird one. They did say they wanted to change the infected's AI, for example, and from what I know, they did try, but it was a lot more challenging than they thought, and it broke a bunch of other things when they tried to do it. So they've put it on the back burner indefinitely, which I believe they did announce when they decided to do it, saying we want to do this, and then later being like, actually we found out it's not possible right now, is not misleading. I keep saying the same thing, but that is just game development, and it happens with every single game. Why would we hold DayZ to a higher standard than every other game? That's not fair, and it was never mentioned in the patch notes. However, they have certainly improved the infected and rebalanced them since they've said they were doing that. So although they haven't specifically altered the AI that I can see, they have made huge improvements to them. Oh, and yeah, there was also the time they added weed to DayZ as well, and then they got banned and they were like, yeah, we probably shouldn't do that. Next point is a big one. Ineffective anti-cheat measures. Cheaters remain a persistent problem with no visible action or proper moderation. Okay, so yeah, DayZ PC has cheaters, with regards to their anti-cheat being ineffective. So not to self-plug, but I have a members video breaking this down and revealing some really cool things about BattlEye that might surprise you, and something that will definitely scare you. So if you want to check that out, maybe become a member. You never know, I might just send you a nude. But moving on from the shameless plug, the thing about BattlEye is it's banning 30,000 players a year. There's not really a better anti-cheat they can rely on for a game specifically like DayZ, but they are constantly making changes and alterations to their own base game to try and tackle cheats and exploits, in addition to paying God knows how much for BattlEye. We've had several attempts from them to try and rectify issues recently, some of which came with server wipes. This, by the way, is visible action. So again, this point comes down to a research issue. And I've said it before, find me a single online PC game that doesn't have cheating. Every game has to deal with it, and popular, competitive or difficult games have to deal with it more because people suck. That being said, I do agree with the moderation one with regards to vanilla servers. There is no real way to report people in real time for exploits or potential cheating, and that can suck. And yes, you can go to BattlEye to report things, but there is a sense of detachment and a feeling your voice isn't really being heard. So I do think moderation could be better in this area, but then as anyone who has ever run their own server knows, it's hard and it requires a lot of time and a lot of manpower. DayZ vanilla servers are in the dozens, so having someone monitor and regulate all of them is a much larger task than it seems. So I understand why it isn't done, but I do think there should be a bit more player to developer interaction here, even if it just comes in the form of a report button where you can submit a name, the time, the date, and they can forward it onto BattlEye for you. But to me, most of the points here felt like the old stale remarks us DayZ players have grown used to, coined by old versions and opinions of DayZ that ignore the developmental changes and the efforts the dev team have taken to work with the community and not against it. The points also fall a lot flatter when you take into consideration the console in its entirety. A lot of them also ignore how things actually work over how they want them to work, confusing idealism with realism. And although I certainly don't disagree with every point made, or at least entirely with everyone made, the DayZ it's describing is not the version that exists today, at least I don't think so. But there still wasn't a justification for how it was handled and how DayZ's DLC was review bombed, and the only people who suffer as a result of it are the community themselves or anybody who was involved in it. Ultimately, review bombing undermines constructive criticism and harms the very communities it claims to represent, especially with a team like DayZ who have continually showed that they listen to player feedback. But realistically, DayZ's Sakal is a really good map, and although I'm not going to sit here and say it's flawless and I have voiced some concerns, I absolutely recommend it to anybody who's on the fence. But if you want a full breakdown of what they've just added to Sakal, then click this video here, or for something else, click here. And as always, until next time.